I'm excited and honored to have two industry veterans joining me on the podcast today. It's a mother-daughter team. Both of them really don't need much of an introduction, but for those listeners that are new to the industry, and we're grateful so many millennials are joining and you're learning more about the industry, you may not know about these two. So we're going to start off with Marcia Davies, and then we're going to begin with Emily Davies. So good to have both of you ladies with us. Thank you for joining us on this special Mother's Day podcast.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
It's really exciting. And what I'm going to start off with, first of all, Marcia, I can't believe anyone doesn't know you, especially with all that you're doing at the MBA. And specifically, the thing I'm most passionate about, having a daughter, is mPower. So let's lead off with you. Give us a little insights into what you do, the company you work for, the MBA, and what you're doing about mPower.
I am Chief Operating Officer of the Mortgage Bankers Association, and I have added to my title Founder of mPower, which is MBA's effort to help women in our industry, and it stands for Promoting Women to Extend Their Reach. And at MBA, as COO, I'm responsible for strategic integration amongst all of the efforts that MBA does. I'm responsible for conferences and membership and training. Believe it or not, IT falls under me, and if you know me, I am not an IT person, but I have a really great group of people who know IT or are experts on that. So there's a whole host of things under that umbrella. But as you mentioned, mPower, over the last 2.5 years, I have been spending a lot of my time creating a network and an environment for women to expand their reach, gain professional development, create networks. And it's just blossomed. I'll end with, in the last 2.5 years, we have engaged more than 11,000 in the mPower community, and it's continuing to grow.
It is such an important part. I want to just say publicly, on behalf of all of our listeners, thank you, Marcia, for your dedication to the MBA, all that you do. People don't realize all that you do, but more importantly, that you do it in such excellence. That's probably very evident because anyone who attends a conference and sees how these conferences run like clockwork, it's amazing. So kudos to you. And then to those listeners that have not experienced an mPower event, I'm telling you, you got to get to the next one. Tricia Magliazzo, which is a dear, dear personal friend of mine, does a lot of those when you're not there. She does an amazing job. But, Marcia, thank you for what you're doing, especially now that I have a daughter who just got into the mortgage industry. And speaking of daughters, let's get over to you, Emily. I'm so excited to have you here, and I'm so honored to have met you in person. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your role there at the company that you're at.
Yes, thanks, David. So it's a good thing I don't have any big shoes to follow with my introduction. But I work with Freddie Mac. I am in their single-family office of the clients, and I've had a number of different roles there in my 8 years with them. But right now I am focused on supporting some of our largest clients and making sure that everything runs as smoothly as it can, and just focusing on being the best partner that we can to the industry.
I love Freddie Mac for many reasons. One of the things they do is they do partner well. I had many, in all the mortgage companies I've owned and run, we've always had a Freddie Mac partnership, and I just really hold that partnership so special. So you're doing a great job of keeping up that reputation of Freddie Mac. Emily, I want us to go to you with this next question, then we'll go to Marcia. But how did you get into the mortgage industry? Was it accidental or intentional? Now, I can suspect what the answer might be, but maybe it's not as suspected. Talk about that. Was it accidental or intentional?
It was accidental.
Wow, I did not anticipate that. With your mom being it, I thought that would be intentional.
It was serendipitous, I think. And, you know, in the environment that I was raised, I've always known my mom was such a powerful leader. And to me, I just didn't think that the mortgage market was necessarily my cup of tea. But when you graduate college, it turns out you need to get a job. And so one of the best ways to do that is to leverage your connections. So while I ended up interviewing and luckily being hired by Freddie Mac, I was able to leverage some of the connections from my mom's legacy. And while it may not have been an intentional first move or first career step, the past 8 years and everything that followed certainly was.
Marcia, was your journey into mortgage lending accidental or intentional?
like my daughter, it was accidental. I actually had been working at a trade association when I first moved to Washington, D.C., and I had a great boss who was fired unexpectedly when she went in asking for pay equity for a job that she was doing for the last year for her boss who had been terminated, and they fired her. And I realized that the reason they felt comfortable doing that right before our convention was because they knew I was there to carry on, and I decided I didn't want to work for an organization that treated people that way. So my 25-year-old self marched in and on principle resigned, which felt good in the moment. And as I was driving home, realizing I had to pay rent and everything else, back then we didn't have phones to call. I had to wait till I got home. And I called my sister and told her what I did. And, the universe provides, because my sister said, don't worry. There is an opening in my organization that I think you'll be perfect for. And so my sister had been, and still does, work at this company. At the time, when I started in 1984, so do the math, you can figure out how old I am, was called the Mortgage Corporation, which was then rebranded as Freddie Mac. And so it was accidental, but my sister, who had just celebrated her 40th anniversary at Freddie Mac this year, was the reason that I even knew about a job in the mortgage industry, and I never left.
That's so cool. And I just got to give you a shout-out to your husband, Scott. He is just such a neat guy, and how he has supported you. I think when you have a strong woman in the industry, it makes it so much easier when you have a wonderful, loving, supportive husband. And I always enjoy being around him. He's always so gracious. And I just love how he lets you operate that's not probably the right characterization, how you have figured out your partner together, and he just loves sitting back and watching you shine. He's just a pretty amazing guy, so be sure to tell him hello for me. When we talk about us getting into the industry, that's one thing, but staying in this industry, especially with the stress and all the twists and turns and all this industry has been through, Marcia, what has kept you here?
Well, David, I was at Freddie Mac for 21 years. And as we mentioned, I started young. Actually, my daughter started younger than I was, but back then
I did. I was
really
going to jump in.
But I was fortunate enough at Freddie Mac, because it was back then a fairly young organization. I was there when the company went public and it was growing, and so I was able to have 4 different careers while I was at Freddie Mac. And I learned along the way, if you take a risk and get out of your comfort zone, you can open up great potential. So I think what's kept me in the industry is I had these amazing 21 years at Freddie Mac, and I stepped away for a little bit of time. And then I went back into the industry and started working at HUD. And I never expected I'd be working in a government agency, but I was there during the housing crisis, and it was really a bird's eye view of how the government and regulators react during something like a housing crisis, and how the banks and mortgage bankers were being perceived by the regulator, which prepared me incredibly well for the job I have at MBA. I've been at MBA 8 years, and it's been, I think, the best job I've had in my career. So I keep learning and growing, and I love the people in this industry. David, I know you've been in it a long time, and you said your daughter just joined, but they are really good people, and you create lasting, lifelong friendships. So I really feel blessed that it might not have been my direct path to come into this industry, but I am blessed that I ended up in this industry.
So, as my mom said, while our time didn't overlap at Freddie Mac, she really hit the nail on the head about the environment there. So when I first started, it was in the event space, much like an area that my mom is familiar with. And while I was
does an amazing job
industry, yes, she does. And, I was involved in the industry events, but it wasn't as in-depth or as close to the flame, as I like to call it. And my hands weren't in the issues the same way. And so one of the things that I've been empowered to do, and, part of it I attribute to having a confidant and having somebody that can help me make the right decisions and mold my choices like my mother, who's familiar with the industry, but it was also having the opportunity within Freddie Mac where you can really decide where you want to go. There's so many different facets of the business. And so, after I had done some time with the event world and I was seeing some of the issues, I wanted to get more involved. I was passionate about seeing resolutions and, being more involved than one event may have you get. And so I was able to, bridge some of those gaps and look for other opportunities and advance my skills into a much closer to the flame type of job in the office of the client. And so I think it's just a completely different role than I would have ever thought. So while it was, not an intentional getting into the mortgage business move, if you will, and I probably would say it was more the events business than the mortgage business, when it was time to shift my career focus, it was absolutely an intentional, this is the business I want to be in. Look at all these great role models, my mother, my aunts, and I had so many powerful women in my family that just laid a foundation. Why wouldn't I want to be in this space? Why wouldn't I want to bring the same type of value and follow in their footsteps any longer?
So good. That's so good. And you did have a great example, and I just applaud Freddie Mac. Kim Schubert is a dear, dear friend of mine. I think runs senior accounts there, and she talked about the leadership within Freddie Mac, and especially when there were some issues coming up and being more high-profile reports in other industries about inequalities and issues with discrimination or just harassment on the workplace. And the way he handled that was just so exemplary. It really touched her, and that's the former CEO. And I just want to give kudos to any management, especially Freddie Mac's management, how they've stepped up on these really important issues. So you're both worked at great places. Emily, you're still there. Let's get into some of your journey within the industry. I love your stories, and I want to focus on, with this being a Mother's Day podcast, I want to focus about those tough places or places that you've gone through. They don't have to be tough stories, but just places where you've gone through where the mother-daughter relationship has really helped. Talk about that. And Emily, we're going to start off with you and then go to Marcia.
For me, one of the challenges when I first entered the business was not knowing enough about the business to really be able to talk intelligently about it. I could pick up snippets here and there from my mother, but I really was trying to learn it myself. I remember my first week, I drew a diagram of what the secondary mortgage market looks like, what it looked like from a borrower perspective all the way through to the secondary side of it. And I think there finally came a time where I wanted to shift my roles and responsibilities, as I mentioned earlier, and I wanted to get a little closer to the flame, where I said, you know what, I have this phenomenal resource at home. I need to learn this business. I don't know enough, and I need to use that. And I remember, calling my mom. I would call her for guidance and for counsel, and frankly, I would call her for Mortgage 101. I would call her, and she would be able to help me get some of that grounding so that I could learn.
That's so important. I think you're so fortunate to have someone who has had such a stellar career in the mortgage industry, has a unique perspective, especially with the role she's had. Marcia, go to that same place. What are some of the places you and your daughter have been through when it comes to the mother-daughter relationship and how it's helped, how you've been able to contribute, and looking back at those special moments?
So I'm going to tell one story because it is a Mother's Day podcast that was so special to me. So
are you going to make me ugly cry on a podcast?
I am not going to make you ugly cry on a podcast. You may not even know this story. So, David, it's pretty traditional that the MBA leadership and the Freddie Mac leadership get together a few times a year, and one of those times is always during our annual convention. And we were in a leadership meeting. It was Freddie Mac's leadership, MBA's leadership at the time, and we were taking a break during that meeting, to get a cup of coffee or whatever, and sitting back down, and I'm getting a cup of coffee, and this other mother who I know, who I worked with for all these years, Chris Boyle, I'm going to give her a shout-out, came up to me because Emily reports up into Chris Boyle's organization. And I make a point not to try to talk about Emily to anybody at Freddie Mac. If they bring her up to me, I'll talk. But I because that's her world. It's not my world. That's my former world. But I'm getting a cup of coffee, and she came up and she whispered into my ear, mother to mother. She said, I want you to know your daughter is doing an amazing job for us. And as a mom, I know you probably wondered how she's doing. So I'm letting you know she's doing amazing work. And that was probably, within the first 18 months, maybe 2 years of Emily's career there. And I just grabbed her hand and I looked at her and I'm like, this is the best part of this annual convention for me. But she respected that I would never ask, but she just wanted to give me that gift. And it was truly a mother-to-mother moment. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that was...
Yes, it does. It's a wonderful story. That's
one of my...
story.
And it's also tracks back to women supporting women. Like, it wasn't about us both being, working mothers or whatever. She just approached me as a mom because I guess she said if I was in her shoes, I'd want to know, but I knew I couldn't ask. So, Emily, I don't know if you know about that story, but it meant the world to me. And to this day, random people come up to me. Some I know from Freddie Mac, so they're not random, but others I don't know, to tell me about the great job my daughter does, just unsolicited. So she is making her mark, and I couldn't be more proud. And yes, we have had those coaching moments where I know. I thought you said you weren't going to make
me cry.
But we have had coaching moments where I've tried to teach patience and perseverance and explain to her that our industry sometimes takes a while to turn. We're not, we're like a battleship. We can't turn on a dime. And as a young millennial coming in asking, why do we do it this way? Why do we do it this way? Why is it? Sometimes I'm like, okay.
Patience.
And, I will say she takes feedback incredibly well. And she also knows, like me, sometimes she can be stubborn. And so sometimes we'll lock heads, but we'll come back at it because at the end of the day, we're both just trying to be the best we can be. And, believe it or not, David, not everybody takes our advice, which is annoying, but
annoying. That's the truth.
I learned that sometimes our advice is not always welcome, or maybe not. And I don't know, but
I will say, one of the things that for me, especially starting out in the industry, I didn't want to, continually play my mom is Marcia Davies card because everybody knows who Marcia Davies is. Everybody knows the wonderful things she does. And I remember the first time I went to an mPower event. This is the one for any of your listeners who happen to be there, where she did make me ugly cry on camera, which was fun. Yes, on camera. Very close.
Oh, good.
Angle, so
it's on record.
Was a good
That's
day for
great.
Me. But, she was just sitting in a room, watching her command the room, listening to women at, coffee breaks or people just coming up or people talking about, this wonderful woman in the industry and just her leadership and direction and how, she's a mother to so many people in just wanting guidance, wanting the best for you, wanting a safe environment. Those are just things that people were saying. And so then for me to turn around and be able to say, that's my mother. Oh, it makes me cry. So proud of that.
That's so cool.
Now she's
I think
one of the me cry.
We run that risk when we start doing these interviews. We do run that risk, but it's so touching. I think the most important part, one of the things you said, Marcia, that I really want to highlight is that you purposely did not interview. You stayed out. You created a space for Emily to shine on her own. And I think that's so hard. I'm struggling with that right now. My daughter's in it for all of, I think, now a month in the mortgage industry. She's working for a client of mine and a friend, and it's so hard not to pick up the phone. How's she doing? How's it going? And I just applaud you for how you put space in there to let her carve out her own mark. And then, Emily, your mom is so well known and so respected in the industry, not to play that card. That really takes some maturity on your part to do that. So kudos to both of you. Hope our listeners will pull away with some of that. So if some of you moms that are wanting to get your daughters or dads, get your kids into this thing like I have been wanting and have now succeeded, learn from those really important lessons. As we wrap up this, and there's so many words of advice, Marcia, I know you offer women through mPower. And by the way, folks, we're going to put in a link in this podcast of the interview I did with Marcia Davies on leadership. So it's a Lykken on Leadership series. There'll be a link. You can click on it. You'll learn a lot more about that. Of course, you can Google mPower, go to the MBA website, and just see all these amazing videos, amazing recordings, and maybe we find the one where she got Emily to just cry right on camera. We'd love to see that. That got to get that one going. But I mean, let's talk about it. And this one, we're going to start out with you, Marcia. Let's start out with the words of advice for others who are trying to bring in people that are important to them. Maybe it's a daughter, maybe it's a son, maybe it's just a loved one or someone that they've mentored over the years. What is the advice you have for bringing someone into the industry and helping them launch a successful career such as that Emily has launched in this industry which you've been a part of?
Well, one, I think there's amazing opportunity within this industry. And I'm going to do a little plug for Mortgage Banking Bound. We have a program that is free, especially to college students, where they can participate in this online program to see if they're even interested in learning more about the business and getting involved in mortgage banking. It gives them kind of the high-level tutorial of mortgage banking and opportunities create. We also have Craft Careers for the commercial multifamily side of the business where we go into colleges. So we really think there's a lot of opportunity. I have experienced the opportunity. I have watched my daughter who has bought her own condo at the ripe old age of, I'm going to say 27. She might correct me. She might have been 28, but I think she was 27. 26, see? 26. She keeps getting,
go.
I get, as I get older, she gets younger. And it's one of those things where it really provides you great opportunity, and there are a lot of different areas in the business you can go. I will say that I think there's a lot of opportunity if you can reach out. I think our industry is very giving. We have a lot of people who are mentoring. I think we have a lot of companies that are looking for young talent, new talent. I can tell you, when my daughter questions a process, I'm like, she's so right. Because she brings a practical theory to it. But, David, you probably know, sometimes we do things because they've worked, and they've worked for a certain amount of time, and so you don't think to go back and question that process. But bringing in new talent and new thoughts creates a whole opportunity to bring in those new perspectives. And so I would love to see more and more young talent come into the industry. I'll do another plug. MBA has a group called MPact, and that is for young professionals. We connect people together. We provide events and opportunities for them as well. And you know what? It's a career that you can have. It's not just a job. You can make it your career. And, my daughter is going to celebrate her 8th anniversary. How hard is that to believe?
This industry.
Isn't
that amazing?
And, David, I do have a funny story I want to tell, and I'm not even sure Emily knows about this story. So it was when I was in public affairs, and my boss, Dan Driscoll, we were in the middle of, some public affairs important priority that was taking us in over the weekend. And so Emily was about 2, and I needed to bring her into the office with me. And so I got in early, and I thought we were the only ones there. And we're in my office, and I'm working on a press release, and Emily, being her 2-year-old self, lets me know it's time. She needs to run to the restroom. And so I take her down the hall, and I realize I forgot my security pass. And that back at that time, the women's room was locked, but the men's room wasn't. And I figure it's Saturday. I should be safe, right? So I open the men's room door, and immediately my boss is standing there because he's walking out. And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, this must be Emily. You're bringing her into the men's room?" And I was stunned because I didn't know how to answer that question. But anyway, we all had a big laugh over it. And, he's a father of 2 and understood the urgency of getting your 2-year-old into a bathroom. But anyway, Emily, you should know the first time you met my mentor was in the men's room.
I think that sounds like the inception of how I learned to start breaking the rules. I think I can say that was because of you, Mom. Thank you for giving me the courage.
I love that story. I love that story. It's so good. One of the things you said, Emily, that really was so good, and that I want to highlight this, and I really think it starts, rather than running your mom and saying, do you have a map of the secondary markets? You made the effort to start mapping those on your own, start doing the research on your own. I think that really shows the type of person that you are. You're going to try to figure it out. You know what I wrote down? Get a copy of that map if it's still available, because I think it's something that we could use. I think it's so valuable. And it's that kind of, and I agree with Marcia. Your mom made a great point. We need people questioning, why do we do that? And that goes back to that old story why they cut the ham in half, and the millennial daughters just got married. Says, why do we cut the ham in half, Mom? And it's because you've heard the story probably before. And it says, well, that's because Grandma did it. So you go to Grandma, why did we cut the ham in half? And Grandma says, oh, we don't need to. I just did that because I couldn't afford the bigger pot. I cooked the ham, had to cut it in half to cook it in 2 pots because I didn't have the big enough pot. I think we do a lot of things in this industry because it's always been done that way. We do a lot of business process improvement. We're seeing that attitude constantly. So what Emily did, listeners, drawing out things, take it on yourself to do that. So, Emily, let's wrap it up. What advice do you have other than mapping out processes and trying to figure it out for themselves? That's just a great way to go about it. But what would your advice for people coming in? And especially for my daughter. Speak to my daughter who's come in, keep Dad out, and how would you advise her?
So first things first, I drew that map in pencil and hung it up on a wall that got a lot of sunlight, so I couldn't read it by my 3rd year. So use pen. That would be my first piece of advice.
That's good.
The second piece is something I actually learned from my mother, and the way that she would, I don't want to say correct, but the way that she would allow me to change my thought process when I wouldn't understand something, or I would get so easily frustrated because a solution seemed black and white to me. And she would say, use every moment as a learning opportunity. She would always talk about how she's been in this industry for so long and she's still learning. And, I think it was something in the beginning I took a little bit for granted, and it is not a simple business. It is not a simple industry. And there is always something to learn. If a process is in place for a certain way, maybe it is because Grandma didn't have a big enough pot, or maybe it's because the ham just tastes better when you cook it in 2 halves, So it's definitely learn something with everything you do. And I will say the second thing that my mom always says that sticks out to me, and I don't even know if you know this, Mom, but you've always said, do your best, regardless of who's watching, regardless of who it's for, regardless of if you agree with it, regardless of how you feel about it. You do your best, and you will shine, and you will be successful, and it will work out. And, I may not always see the things working out, but whenever I follow that advice, it does pan out, and it does come true. And I think that is universal. I think when you show up with purpose, when you show up with intention, you always do your best work, and that gets seen. And, I lied. I have one more piece, something that a quote that my mom has shared with me is, when you get to the top, send the elevator back down. I by no means, think that I'm at the top, but I try to help every person that I can. I like to do recognition. I love to share that, and that's something that I see my mom exemplify in all of her behaviors. And I just think it is something that is so fundamental in a workplace, and it just goes such a long way. So make sure that when you're in your winning season, you're looking around to see who else you can bring on your team. And I think that is also just as universal. And I am so lucky that, my head coach is that lovely one that I get to call Mom, over there on the other side of the phone.
Wow. That is, how do you top that? Folks, if you have any concern about the future of our industry, listen to the words that just came out of Emily Davies' mouth. That was just amazing. And
She's
it's a testimony.
Right?
Impressive. Just like her mom. If you go to any conference and wonder why it runs so well, you know Marcia's behind the scenes. I've watched her walking out of a meeting with David Stevens back in those days carrying a 3-ring binder, and you know that thing was going to run well because of how much planning went into it. Wow, this has been so much fun to connect with both of you and have you share with our listening audience some of these great stories, and there's so many principles that are taken away. I want to say thank you to both of you for being here, and happy Mother's Day.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you. Love you, Mom. Thanks, David.